Hello, everybody, and welcome to Coffee with a Therapist. This lovely Monday morning, I'm just sipping on some coffee with coconut creamer and just enjoying the start to my week. And I hope you're doing the same. I hope you're having a great start to your week. I am going to talk today about a question that was actually asked to me on TikTok after going through a video that was talking about different traits of toxic parenting. And then also the traits that we might exhibit if we've been raised in a family that, or let me reframe that. If we were raised in a family that struggled with toxic behaviors, we'd have certain traits. And one of those traits was called internalized gaslighting. And I got a lot of comments that asked, what does that mean exactly? What is internalized gaslighting? I know a lot of people have heard of the term gaslighting and narcissism and codependency and all of that jazz. But essentially, internalized gaslighting is when we turn gaslighting into our own narrative of how we respond to events. So, for instance, when a loved one of ours, if they do something that hurts our feelings, our gut reaction is to think, well, maybe I'm overreacting, or maybe they didn't mean it that way, or can I really trust my emotional response? Essentially, it's this phenomenon that typically happens, especially if we've had toxic parenting as kiddos. We might learn to question our own emotional reactions to experiences instead of trusting them. So it's this idea that we've lost trust in our emotional reactions to things, and that's often because other people, and usually caregivers in our lives, have questioned or basically told us that our responses to their behaviors is not okay or is wrong. So if we've had somebody that has minimized our experiences of them, or made it that we were crazy, or that we were too emotional or whiny, or to whatever, we grow up to question our own emotional responses and essentially end up gaslighting ourselves. So it's not even that somebody has to say this to us, but if we get hurt and we feel a reaction, it's when we start to ask ourselves the questions of, is this really what's happening? Am I overreacting? Am I being too sensitive? Maybe it's really all in my head. They love me, so they didn't really mean it that way. Those are all different thoughts that we might have if we are gaslighting ourselves. Now, I will be 100% real. It is a healthy thing for us to question our emotional responses every now and then. However, we also, when we talk about questioning them, it's not just saying, hey, they don't matter, or mitigating them, or just questioning if we're being too sensitive. It's more about saying, where did that come from, and what does that actually mean for me? And taking pause and saying, am I, even if I am, quote unquote, feeling a very strong emotion, it's likely that that person still did something that was not okay. And that we don't want to write off that emotion, that we want to understand that emotion, understand what it means about how we feel, or if there's a boundary that we need to set that we haven't set before. So when we engage in things like internalized gaslighting, we're going to be really crappy at setting boundaries because we will not even pay attention or listen to or ask ourselves the questions that we need to ask ourselves to know what kind of boundaries we need to set with people. Instead, we'll just write it off and make excuses for other people and put it all on us, put it all on our emotional response. And so as I went through what that was, a lot of people started to resonate, and they're like, man, I didn't realize, but I've been internally gaslighting myself for years. And again, I don't think people realize that when we lose trust in ourselves, we often do have that voice of internalized gaslighting. And I wanted to give some examples of specific thoughts that, are what we would call internalized gaslighting, and then what we can think of instead to affirm our own beliefs and our emotional responses. Because the opposite of emotional gaslight or internal gaslighting is affirming our beliefs and our responses and our emotional reactions to events that happen to us. So I'm going to use my little cheat sheet over here. I wrote down some examples, but I want to make sure I say them correctly for y'all. I had it out earlier. Okay. So a self-gaslighting thought would be something like, I am too dramatic, too emotional, too sensitive, too insert something, right? Too crazy. And so an affirmation that could counter that would be something like, my feelings and emotions are valid, because they are. Every single one. They are valid, and typically they have a context and a place that they come from, and it's important that we explore that versus just writing them off. Another thought might be something like, I know they love me and they didn't really mean it like that, so I should just get over it. Well, even if somebody does love you, and I think it is good to remember that at the end of the day, like, typically people are trying to remain in connection with us, it doesn't write off their abusive or harmful or hurtful behaviors. It doesn't take the hurt out of that. So it's still important that we actually communicate about that and set boundaries with people, because again, often they don't even know that they're hurting us. And if that happens over and over again, that really does erode at our self-esteem, our self-respect, and just the safety of that relationship. Another thing we could say is, maybe it's just all in my head. Like, I just feel like I'm just crazy making. Maybe I'm just thinking too much. And again, like, it's important that we affirm that our experiences are real and valid. Even when others are trying to, or others in the past have invalidated our experiences and emotions, they are valid and they're worth exploring. And if we don't explore them, that's just going to be trouble for us and our relationships. Another common one we might say are things like, I am too much, I'm just too much, or I'm not enough. Those are other forms of internalized gaslighting. I have a lot of clients that struggle with the belief, I am not enough. And really, we have to dig deep into this, and you may have to do some trauma work around this, but ultimately the affirmation for that is, I will never be too much, and I am always enough. Always. Not when you're this, or you achieve this, or you're prettier, stronger, whatever, insert thing. But right now, as you are enough. And that's really, for a lot of people, that feels icky to even absorb as I'm saying that. So if that's you, definitely do work around that, because it's worth doing. Another thought or belief would be something like, it's all my fault anyway. It's all my fault. Or, if I just did this, or we talked about it at a different time of day, then maybe they wouldn't have reacted so bad. But truly, the affirmation is, it takes two people to tango. There's always two people involved in this interaction, and you are not responsible for how somebody responds to you or how they treat you. It should never be about like the time of day, or like if you present it perfectly. Like, none of us will do that. They are still responsible for how they respond to you. And you are not responsible for that, and especially not all responsible, right? It definitely takes two to tango. I say that so often in my couple sessions, because it's very easy for us to point the finger at the other person, except for if we internally gaslight, and then we are really good at pointing it at ourselves and not the other person when it is appropriate. And then last but not least, sometimes there's this thought too, if people internally gaslight, that I love them, so I just should do this. I should just go ahead and do this, or I should just go with the flow of this, even if it bothers me. And really, love is not about giving up ourselves. It's not about giving up the things that we care about, or our own sense of safety, or our preferences. And when we do that, we actually don't give the other person a chance to love us and to know us. And so love is not about just giving in and doing everything the other person wants to do. It's also about being able to communicate about your differences and honoring that, and letting that person love you back in the way that they are accepting of your differences. And you've set boundaries, so you're not creating contention and resentment over time. Don't just go with the flow or do things just because you love that person, because that's not really love. In fact, that is, what would I say? That is like avoidance of conflict, or avoidance of actually letting that person really be who they are, right? And on the other end too, it's interesting, because a lot of people, if they've been with a person who consistently goes with the flow and doesn't tell them they don't like something, or they don't want to do something, they start to feel resentment towards that person too, which is kind of an interesting dynamic. So it's not loving to just go with the flow and not ever challenge that person or, be different from them. We're not trying to like date and be in relationship with ourselves. It is important that we have differences and that we can express them in a healthy and respectful way. All right, y'all. I hope that was helpful in describing what internalized gaslighting is and then providing some examples and some affirmations we can use. If any of those affirmations just felt like, like I want to believe that, but I really have a hard time internalizing the second belief, the affirmation belief, I would encourage you to do some work around that because it is absolutely 100% worth it in your relationships and just in your life in general, in the ways that you're going to show up at work, in your friendships, and in other areas of your life. So I hope you'll have a wonderful Monday. I will check in with you later this week. Bye, y'all.